if you're somebody who is skeptical of the motivations behind the social media platforms booting Trump and the consistency of the application of their guidelines, you are not alone. I join you on your journey of skepticism. And one thing that I think my old industry of mainstream media did not do very well, or still does not do very well, but definitely when I was in it, we had a hard time sometimes simply because people just didn't know what they didn't know and didn't have time to do the research, but we didn't give people a lot of historical context often when we'd have these headlines and the breaking news like, has this ever happened before? Did a prior administration do this? You know, what's the precedent? What's happened in the past? How common is this? Because it's often just like breaking news, breaking news, breaking news. You got to pay attention to this because it's big news, right? But maybe it's happened before. I draw your attention to this article written by Reuters from June 16, 2009, entitled U.S. State Department Speaks to Twitter Over Iran. So I thought of this article, actually just looked it up the other day because I remembered an interview that I've talked about on my channel before, which was truly paradigm shifting for me, with a professor at the University of Tehran. And he was bringing up what Twitter's role was in protests over a disputed election in 2009 in Iran involving Ahmadinejad. The professor was basically saying, so what's the deal here? Like, you know, Twitter didn't mind staying open, you know, for something involving controversy in another country. So does America just have no problem involving itself in, you know, regime changes in other countries and the use of social media in those processes? But when it comes to our country, it's like, no. And I thought of that the other day, and so I just was like looking it up, and I found this article, and it kind of was mind-blowing because it just shows the juxtaposition of what we're dealing with right now. And I think these bring up fair questions about what's really going on. And I just curious, I'll read it to you. Tell me in the comment section if you think this is apples to oranges, not a fair comparison, or if you think it's similar. So here we go. It says the U.S. State Department said on Tuesday it had contacted the social networking service Twitter to urge it to delay a planned upgrade that would have cut daytime service to Iranians who are disputing their election. Confirmation that the U.S. government had contacted Twitter came as the Obama administration sought to avoid suggestions it was meddling in Iran's internal affairs as the Islamic Republic battled to control deadly street protests over the election result. Twitter and Facebook have been used as a tool by many young people to coordinate protests over the election's outcome. President Barack Obama said earlier on Tuesday he believed, quote, people's voices should be heard and not suppressed in Iran. Obama, who has sought direct engagement with Iran, also said he did not want to be seen as, quote, meddling in Iranian internal affairs, given the two countries' rocky history. But his spokesman, Robert Gibbs, said Obama has, quote, deplored and condemned the violence that we've seen and underscored that the world is seeing in Iran a yearning for change. Twitter said in a blog post it delayed a planned upgrade because of its role as a, quote, important communication tool in Iran. The hour-long maintenance was put back to 5 p.m., which corresponds to 1:30 a.m. on Wednesday in Iran. The upgrade originally had been planned for Monday night in the United States, which would have cut daytime service in Iran on Tuesday. The State Department declined to give immediate details of the contact with Twitter, which has been used particularly by young urban Iranians who are disputing President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's re-election last Friday. The rest of the article basically goes on to just kind of explain again what happened with the election in Iran, and then saying that the State Department rejected the idea that contacting Twitter was meddling in Iranian internal affairs. But the last quote is this exactly. This is about giving their voices a chance to be heard. One of the ways that their voices are heard are through new media, Kelly said. That's the State Department spokesperson. So I'm going to play you a quick clip of that interview that I referenced earlier with Professor MARANDI at the University of Tehran, being interviewed by Richard MEDHURST. He's an independent journalist who covered the Assange trial. He also covers American foreign policy from a totally different perspective than you will get in mainstream media in the United States. So if you're interested in that, definitely go subscribe to his YouTube channel. I'll have a link in the description. This interview was done right after the election in November.
The US government asked Twitter to not to shut down because Twitter wanted to shut down and repairs. And they said, no, please keep going. We need you to help undermine Iran. When the elections are much closer in the United States, I mean, in Iran, it was a landslide. In the United States, the election outcome was extremely close, yet the shutting down of all dissent, including on Twitter, is extraordinary. So it's the exact opposite. In the case of Iran and the borderline between these tech companies and the state are increasingly becoming blurry. So on the one hand, they can be used to undermine states, countries that are independent of the United States, but in the United States, they're being used to shut down the dissent.
You know, now the debate and the buzz around this issue has moved from the content moderation on platforms to the actual devices that we are all using, being able to even access competitor platforms. So, of course, the argument always was that, hey, if you don't like the content moderation on Twitter or Facebook, you don't like their community guidelines, then just create your own platform and go there. But with Parler, we've seen that kind of go out the window because they've been booted from Amazon. The Apple App Store, you know, isn't going to carry them. And so if you have an iPhone or a Mac, you can't download it. And so what does that say now about where we're headed there? And as I've been listening to people online discussing this, like on YouTube, for instance, listening to different opinions, it seems like the average person is okay with content moderation that follows the law. Basically, like, you know, the First Amendment has restrictions on things you can say, right? And a lot of people agree that that's okay, that content moderation around that is okay. What people seem to be the most bothered by is simply the subjective and sort of arbitrary application of guidelines, or even just sort of just how arbitrary the guidelines can be themselves. And that would there be more support for content moderation, what some people would call censorship, which I have said in the past, I've used that term. I understand that in pure sense of the word, censorship is not probably the right word to use. So if we say content moderation, for instance, that most people would be okay with some form of it if it was consistently applied. But their issue is that it's not consistently applied, that there are other world leaders who have engaged in, you know, considerable violence that are still on these platforms and have not gotten booted off. So what does that say about their booting Trump? I've heard that argument. And you know, when it comes to journalists, for instance, I actually think this is a really interesting debate to have as well, because I've been reading a lot of articles about, like, is objective journalism a thing of the past? Is subjectivity just sort of where we're headed? Should we just own it and just be honest about it? I actually don't think that the subjectivity is really the issue people have, even though that is what they often say. They often say that I don't like it when there's bias in the news. What I think people don't like is hypocrisy. I think that what they don't like is a hypocritical or inconsistent application of subjectivity. So I'm hard on my person or your person, but I'm easy on my person. You know, that in-group bias and how that affects one's ability to understand what's going on. I frankly think that actually the public would be far more open to reporters and the way that they're talking and acting nowadays, which has changed, I believe, in the last few years, especially on social media under the Trump administration. If those sort of aggressive ways of going after a leader were applied in the past to past administrations for similar circumstances. And I think, again, like I've said, I think it's not so much the subjectivity, though perhaps you disagree with me, and again, leave me a comment about that. I think it's hypocrisy and inconsistent application. So same thing with these social media platforms. Would you be more amenable to content moderation if it was consistently applied? Curious what you think. Again, I don't have all the answers. I'm just Allison here, trying to make her way on YouTube after years in mainstream media, right? So what do I know? Leave me a comment. Don't forget to like, share. Please make sure you're subscribed. I keep hearing from people that they're not getting notifications, that they get unsubscribed. I don't know what's going on there, but just make sure you're subscribed. And I'm curious to hear what you think about all of this. I'll see you guys next time.